It was more than I could tell. Oh, something strange had happened there, just what I did not know. John believed a miracle, but I just turned to go. Circumstance and speculation couldn't lift me very high, 'cause I'd seen them crucify him, and then I saw him die. Oh, back inside the house again, the guilt and
anybody with a heart that's beating knows how it feels when a heart gets broken.
Everybody's felt the bitter sting when careless, angry words are spoken.
Hey now, hey now.
there's a place where the healing water runs like a river through a barren desert.
I hear the Father calling all his children, bring your troubles and come together.
Hey now, hey now. Everybody gather round, come on, lay your burdens down. You don't have to shoulder the weight. It don't matter where you're from, where you've been, or what you've done. Jesus came to show you the way. Grace will always be our common ground. Hey now. Let the maker of a blue sky morning chase away the night and make you new. Trace the wonders of his mercy, rising like the sun and breaking through. Hey now, hey now. Everybody gather round, come on, lay your burdens down. You don't have to shoulder the weight. It don't matter where you're from, where you've been, or what you've done. Jesus came to show you the way. Grace will always be our common ground. Hey now. Movers, shakers, backseat takers, no one's gone too far. Losers, winners, saints and sinners, come just as you are. Everybody gather round, come on, lay your burdens down. You don't have to shoulder the weight. It don't matter where you're from, where you've been, or what you've done. Jesus came to show you the way. Everybody gather round, come on, lay your burdens down. You don't have to shoulder the weight. It don't matter where you're from, where you've been, or what you've done. Jesus came to show you the way. And grace will always be our common ground. Grace will always be our common ground. Hey now. Hey now. Hey now, hey now. Hey now, hey now. Hey now, hey.
Well, good evening. I hope that everyone is doing great today. Got to enjoy this beautiful weather some, and I hope that now you are ready and excited to come and study God's Word with us. I want to give you some updates on some of the prayer requests from this morning. I want to remind you to continue to keep Sister Esther Rainey in prayer. She's still not able to transfer. Brother Close Jr., they said his heart enzymes are off, and so continue to pray for him. Continue to pray for the Trahan family, for the situation in Ukraine and Russia, for Jackson Elric, for him to get to feeling better, for Sister Shirley Huff going to see her cancer doctor, for Sister Carla Thompson recovering from her hip surgery, Sister Melba Barber's brother-in-law passed away, and so they were heading up to the Longview area to be with her sister. So just be in prayer for that family as well. I know they're having a really difficult time. Brother Clyde Berry had a good report, so we're grateful for that. And then Sister Sharon's son Vance, that's been so sick, had a PET scan and is going to see the doctor this week to find out if they can give him some answers. So pray that the results of that are good and that it's able to give them some good answers about some things they can do going forward. I remember True Light's organizational service is this Saturday. It's at 11 o'clock on Berwyn, and so we'll leave here at about 9:45 to go up there and support them. If there's any way at all that you can be there, it would be really good. I'd sure appreciate that. You're welcome to meet here and ride up in the van at about 9:45, or if you'd like to meet us up there, then you can find the address online. If you just search True Light Berwyn, then it will BERWYN. It'll give you directions if that's more convenient for you. So it'll be at about 11 o'clock. There'll be an organization service and then lunch to follow. I know Brother John Rains will be bringing a great message and that you'll be blessed by being there. So keep all those things in mind. If you have any other prayer requests, then please share those in the chat. Love to pray with you over those things that God has going on in your life, and to just ask God to continue to intervene in each and every one. At this point, though, I want to go ahead and get started with our text. I'm pre-recording tonight, teaching the teens tonight. We've worked out a little bit of a rotation with Chris and I, and so he's helping them get started, and then I'll come over and do the lesson. And so I'm recording now, and then we'll go over there. So I'm not here to interact with your prayer requests live, but I will come back later and take a look at them. Last week, we looked at the judgment of the Philistines. We looked at the Philistines being, we looked at the judgment of Israel, rather. This week, we'll see the judgment of the Philistines. Eli and his sons had grown decadent. His sons were wicked, and he was passive. And God, as a judgment on them, caused the ark to be taken away and for Eli's family to be struck by death and heartache. Eli's sons both died, and Eli died in the same day, and the ark was taken to Philistia. One of his descendant, or one of his granddaughters, I guess, or daughter-in-laws, announced that her son should be named Ichabod as she was dying, giving birth to him, which means the glory has departed. God's presence had left Israel. Their defining feature, Moses had said, Lord, if you don't go with us, don't take us up from here, because your presence is what shows all the nations of the earth that we are your people. It was the presence of God that was the biggest thing Adam and Eve lost when they were expelled from the garden. It was the presence of God that led the people out of Egypt and that they would not go forward without. It was the presence of God that was manifested in the Ark of the Covenant in the middle of the tabernacle that now has been taken away. It was taken into battle and it was captured and taken to Philistia. At this point, we're talking a very long time ago, and so over 3,000 years ago. So at this point, Philistia is not like a country like we would think of a country. Rather, it's a confederation of city-states. And so you have 5 cities that cooperate together, that all have a common genealogy, a common culture, somewhat common religion. And so there's not like a king that's over all of them. Each city is kind of independent, but they come together to make decisions and work together. So the last week we saw it was captured, and it's being taken back to the cities of Philistia. We saw here the Philistines take the Ark of the Covenant. Let me drop this camera off so you can see this just a little bit bigger. Okay, so the ark was taken from Shiloh over here to Ebenezer, where it had been, where they took it to the battle. Then we'll see the ark was brought here when the Philistines captured it. From Aphek, it's going to be brought down to Ashdod. From Ashdod, it's going to be brought over to Gath. From Gath, it's going to be brought up. We're going to see a real mess. So we'll switch back and forth from this map as relevant. But you see that when it's in Philistine territory, it zigzags all around because nobody wants it. And but God is going to work things out to judge the Philistines. He used the Philistines to judge Israel, but he also judges the Philistines for attacking Israel. We'll see that later when Babylon and Assyria come in and invade. God allows that to happen and uses that as a judgment on his people. And yet, those nations that God uses as his tools to judge his people are not excused from responsibility for their sin just because God used it. So that's a very important distinction. Let's go back here and let's see what we can see. The Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. So imagine this scene. They bring it into the temple of their God. It's a victory tour. They want to show their God's triumph over the gods of Israel. And so they bring the Ark of the Covenant and they put it down in Dagon's temple, and then everybody goes home for the night. And when the people get up early the next morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And so when they come in, this idol, this statue of their God, is bowing down before the ark of the covenant. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. So they took Dagon up off the ground and stood him back up. And then everybody goes home again. And when they arose early on the morrow morning, the next day, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So once again, Dagon is fallen flat on his face, bowing down to the ark. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. So Dagon this time had fallen down and hit the threshold, and the head of the statue and the hands of the statue had broken off, and all that was left was his trunk. You see here, the idol that they worship, Dagon, in this display of God's power, God has this idol bow down to him. They set the idol back up, and the idol bows down to him again, and this time is shattered. The Philistines think that their God has been victorious over the God of Israel. And God gives them this powerful sign that no, actually, the gods that they worship are dead statues, and that he is the living God. The gods that they worship have got no hands to act, no head to think or to plan, but that the living God of Israel works all things together for good. So you can imagine all the idols in our lives today. In the presence of God, they bow down. In the presence of God, they are impotent. In the presence of God, the things that we think we can trust, everything else is proven to be sand. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Therefore, neither the priests of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod unto this day. So when they went in the temple, they stepped over the threshold. They didn't want to stand on the spot where Dagon's head had been broken and his hands had been broken. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us." So they said, "We're not going to keep the ark here. Somebody else is going to have the ark. This ark is bringing us trouble. This ark is attacking us." I'm sorry, I skipped verse 6. "But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereof." The word coasts means the region around it, the outskirts. And so Ashdod and the surrounding villages, the people are being struck with emerods. These are, emerod means swelling. We get our word hemorrhoid from it. These are probably tumors. They're growths that appeared on the people. Like Egypt was struck with boils in one of the plagues, here the people of Ashdod are struck with these tumors growths on them. For various reasons that we'll get into in a second, a lot of scholars believe that these growths are bubonic plague. We'll talk about that when we get there. But he is destroying them. He's causing them a lot of suffering. Apparently people are dying of this, because he's just destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereof. And when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so when they have seen their God broken and now they see themselves hurt, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us. It's been nothing but trouble. He needs to be gone. For his hand is sore upon us and upon Dagon our God." They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them, and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" So these 5 leaders come together, and they say, "Look, we've had a lot of problems ever since we have had this ark here with us. What should we do?" And they answered, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be carried about unto Gath." And they carried the ark of Israel about thither. So if we go back to our map, Gath is here. So we go from Aphek to Ashdod to Gath. Now Gath is a place that you're probably familiar with as being the home of Goliath. Gath was a major, powerful town. All the Philistine places were important, but the Gath was the key. Gath was this extremely wealthy, extremely powerful place. Goliath was from there, so they had a lot of military strength. The ancient believed that Dagon was their theology is a little bit strange to us. They believed that there was Dagon, that was a god, but they believed in Dagon at Aphek and Dagon at Gath and Dagon at Ashdod. They believed in kind of almost a different set of gods. The same God manifested in different ways in different places. And so Gath, being a strong place in their minds, clearly had a stronger God. And so they say, well, let's get the ark away from Ashdod inland toward Gath. So here they expect the god at Gath, the Philistine gods at Gath, to be able to fight against the Lord more completely. Now, later on, when they finally give up and send the ark back, they make little statues of golden mice to send with him. And this is the same with the ark. This is the reason that a lot of scholars suspect that maybe this is an outbreak of bubonic plague, which of course is spread by rats, and it would come in at the sea. And so they say they don't want to believe that it's the Lord. And in fact, even at the end, even after 7 months of this going on, they still have their doubts and they want to test and see, is this really God's judgment or not? And so when they send the ark from Ashdod to Gath, they're getting it away from the ports where bubonic plague would come in, and they're moving it to somewhere where they believe that the god would be stronger. And so that's what's happening here. So they send them to Gath, and they carried the ark of the God of Israel about thither. And it was so that after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. So these tumor growths, let me pull this back up here. If you look, good old Wikipedia here, you can see the tumors, the growths that people would get from bubonic plague, and you can see it's on its upper thigh here. It was, of course, we know it was spread by the fleas on the rats today, but they thought it was just spread by rats. And so you can see, of course, a really horrible disease. And so between the rats and the word emeralds, which could mean tumor, it's just a swollen place, and then it being on their secret parts and everything. That's why a lot of scholars believe that God's striking them with plague. And of course, we know in Rome, the plague at one point killed 25 million people. The plague in Europe killed a third of the whole population. This is a big deal if plague is what it is. If it's not plague, then regardless, the hand of the Lord was against them with a very great destruction. Rich people, poor people, and everybody in between are suffering and dying. Therefore, they sent the ark of God to Ekron. And so they're just sort of moving in this circuit, right? So the ark of God was taken from Ebenezer, where it was captured, to Aphek. From Aphek to Ashdod, from Ashdod to Gath, from Gath to Ekron. I told you there were 5 main Philistine cities, and they've just used 4 of them. And it came to pass, as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They have brought about the ark of the God of Israel to us to slay us and our people." So they say, "We don't want that. You're going to kill us." The ark, bring the ark of God here, the God of Israel here. You're going to get us killed, just like you people have been killed. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go again to his own place, that it slay us not and our people." For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. And the men that died not were smitten with the emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So many died. The ones who didn't die were suffering. And they cried out so loud you could hear it in the heavens, in their agony. Now, I want to stop here for a second. We're going to do chapter 6 as well tonight. But I want to stop here for a second and think. Goliath was from Gath. Goliath was probably alive, thinking he's an established warrior and everything. And if not alive, his parents were alive when the God of Israel is brought to his town and there's an outbreak of death and suffering. And yet Goliath taunts the God of Israel. And of course is rewarded for it with a stone to the head. We have got extremely short memories, I think, when it comes to recognizing God's judgment and God's justice. We've got extremely short memories when it comes to seeing what God is doing. And so Goliath had seen God act before in judgment, and he forgot. He forgot in the sense that he continued to sin anyway. Others throughout the Bible, Israel over and over again, had seen God act to deliver them and forgot that God always delivered. This judgment then shows the victory of God over the Philistines. So why would God's people ever be afraid of the Philistines again? Because they forgot. Why would we, who have been rescued and saved and helped by Jesus time and time again, why would we ever fear? Because we forget. It's very important for us to realize how short our memories are. It's very important for us to remember that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that we can look on his works in the past to know his character and know his power, to trust him for the future. Chapter 6, And the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, "What shall we do to the ark of the Lord? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to his place." So their question is not really what shall we do to the ark of the Lord. They already know what they're going to do with the ark of the Lord. They say, when we send the ark of the Lord away, what do we do to make the plague stop? They already know they can't keep the ark anymore. And for 7 months they've waited. And for 7 months they've allowed themselves to suffer in this way before they decide to send the ark back. Why is that? Well, it's politics. They don't want to admit God's victory. They don't want to admit that their God has been defeated, that they've been defeated by the Israelites. They don't want to humiliate themselves by returning the symbol of their victory. So what shall we do to the ark of the Lord? What shall we send with the ark? And they say, now, though, they know they need to send the ark back. And when they do it, they want to send gifts to appease God so he'll stop this judgment on them. Now, why they wait 7 months to talk to the priests and the diviners is apparently that same pride. Maybe they had asked them before and just hadn't followed their advice because they know that the ark needs to be sent away. But that's their situation. So he says, and they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering. Then you shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. It said, so send the ark back, and send the ark with gifts. Don't send it back empty-handed, but put trespass offerings with it, and then you'll be healed. Then said they, what shall the trespass offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For one plague was on all of you and on your lords. So they said, you're going to send 5 golden tumors, 5 golden lumps, and 5 golden mice. Again, this is where the idea comes from that maybe what God sent on the Philistines was an outbreak of bubonic plague. It's valuable, it's gold, so it is something that's a meaningful sacrifice, and it's a picture of their sin. It's a recognition of God's judgment on their sin. They're saying, yes, God, here's the way that you've judged us. Not just some of us, but all of us. We're all in the same boat, so there's 5. And it's by recognizing their sin, by recognizing what they've done, by recognizing the judgment from God that they deserve, that they're able to have forgiveness. Of course, we don't appease God by sending God little things of gold. But if you want to be saved, if you want to be forgiven of your sin, the way to do it is to admit to God that you deserve this judgment that Jesus took. To come to the cross and say, that should have been me on that cross, but it was Jesus instead. God, have mercy to me, a sinner. It's the same idea. It's to recognize our guilt and to fall on his grace. It said, wherefore ye shall make images of your emerods and images of your mice that mar the land, and you shall give glory unto the God of Israel. So you'll make images of little statues of the emerods, the tumors, the growths, and little statues of the mice that plague the land. Apparently, these mice are bringing the plague and also destroying the land, destroying crops and stuff. It's an infestation. It says, and you shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off you, and from off your gods, and from off your land. So you will glorify him so that he'll show you mercy. Wherefore then do ye harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not let the people go, and they departed? Now, therefore, make a new cart, and take 2 milk kine, on which there hath come no yoke, and tie the kine to the cart, and bring their calves home from them. And take the ark of the Lord, and lay it upon the cart, and put the jewels of gold, which ye return for a trespass offering, in a coffer by the side thereof, and send it away, that it may go. And so, are you going to follow the same example of Egypt? Now, this was hundreds of years before. This is 400 years in the past. More than that, huh? Almost 500 years in the past. 450 years in the past. That God had sent his judgment on Egypt. But they still remember. And the priests say, look, do you remember what Egypt did? They kept on ignoring God, and God kept on escalating and escalating and escalating. They hardened their heart and hardened their heart, and God hit harder and harder until he parted the Red Sea and crushed the Egyptian army. He says, so is that going to be you? Or are you going to send the ark home? Again, he says, you need to remember. You need to remember what God has done. You need to remember that the God who has acted in the past is the same God who acts now. So go ahead and get a cart and put the golden statues in it and send the ark away. They said, go and get these new milk cows that have never been yoked before. If they'd been yoked before, then they might have been trained. They might have been shown where to go. But instead, these are going to be the last test. It says, and see, if it goeth up by the way of his own coast to Beth Shemesh, then he hath done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that smote us. It was a chance that happened to us. So 7 months later, they say, maybe we just had some bad luck. So put the ark on a cart and attach it to 2 cows. And if those 2 cows come back to their own home, if those 2 cows come back to their calves, they follow the need of all nature, then we'll know it was just a coincidence that we had the ark and these things happened. But if these 2 cows turn the other direction, march toward Israel, it says, then we'll know that it was the Lord that did this to us. And the men did so, and took 2 milk kine and tied them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. So they drive the calves away from the mothers and lock the calves up so they won't chase the mothers. And now, do the mothers turn around and go back? Of course not. They laid the ark of the Lord upon the cart and the coffer with the mice of gold and the images of their emerods. And the kine took the straight way. It took the straight way to the way of Beth Shemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them unto the border of Beth Shemesh. So the ark is captured, is taken from Shiloh to Ebenezer for the battle, is taken from Ebenezer to Aphek when it's captured, is brought down to Ashdod, over to Gath, up to Ekron, and then these cows follow the road on their own, not deviating to the right hand or the left, to Beth Shemesh, which is 7 miles down the way. The ark comes home. God brings the ark back to his people. For 7 months, they were without the ark as a judgment because of their sin, but God pulling back his presence, he does not remove his presence completely. God judges his people for our sin, but he does not reject his people. He always restores. He always brings forgiveness. He always brings peace. They of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. And they saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. And the cart came into the field of Joshua at Beth Shemite and stood there where there was a great stone. So the cart came into the field of someone named Joshua, who was from Beth Shemesh, and stood there. And there was a great stone there, and they clave the wood of the cart and offered the kine as a burnt offering unto the Lord. So they take the cart that the ark was on, and they kill the cows that brought the ark back, and they sacrifice the cows on the fire from the wood of the cart. They take this opportunity. The ark is returned. It's returned with the trespass offerings of the Philistines, and the Israelites respond by worshiping. They praise God for coming back to them. They make this sacrifice, and they celebrate that God's presence has returned. The Philistines are on this kind of reverse victory tour. Normally, you might conquer an enemy, and you might take their riches and their possessions and take it from town to town, showing your people, oh, here's the wonderful things that we spoiled from the enemy. But instead, here, what was supposed to be a sign of victory is a sign of defeat after defeat after defeat. The wood of the cart, they offered the kine a burnt offering unto the Lord. So, you imagine this picture of When God's enemies think that God has been defeated, that's when he is really victorious. And of course, I'm not prone to the allegorical method of interpretation, but we have to think about Jesus. When Satan put it in Judas's heart to kill Jesus, to hand Jesus over to be crucified, it must have seemed like a victory. It must have seemed like Jesus had been overcome, like God's people had been overcome. But of course, when Jesus was conquered, seemingly, that's when he was really conquering. By death, Jesus defeated the one who had the power of death, that is the devil. That's what the scripture says. That by his death, Jesus gives us life. The ark that they thought was a judgment, they thought that God had been defeated, he was victorious. When Jesus was taken from the cross to the tomb, that seems like it ought to be a defeat tour, but instead it was a victory tour. That the cross becomes the symbol of life and hope for people around the world. That the tomb was not the place where Jesus was defeated, but where all the idol powers had to bow down, their hands and their head crushed. Satan's head crushed by the seed of the woman, his hands broken off because his power is defeated. See, when you, as a child of God, feel like things are at their most hopeless, we need to look back and remember that God is in control and that God does his best work in the darkest moments, that weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. That God's power is made perfect in weakness. That the situation that seems like a failure, that seems like a defeat, may be the situation that God is setting up to bring about victory. So again, in this case, it was a judgment on the Israelites' sin. But God used even the judgment on their sin to judge their enemies and thereby protect the Israelites. Verse 15, and the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the coffer that was with it, wherein the jewels were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices the same day unto the Lord. So the Levites come, they're the ones who have the right to pick the ark up and move it, and they set it on this big stone, and then the sacrifices are made that same day. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. And these are the gold emerods which the Philistines returned for a trespass offering unto the Lord. For Ashdod 1, for Gaza 1, for Askelon 1, for Gath 1, for Ekron 1. And these and the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both of fenced cities and of country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, whereon they set down the ark of the Lord, which stone remaineth unto this day in the field of Joshua the Bethshemite. He's saying from coast to coast, Gaza and Ashdod and Askelon and Ekron and Gath, that all the nations of the Philistines, all their power, God has conquered. And again, we see the stone is still there at the time that Samuel's written. This big stone was there as a reminder. And of course, the point of that is, whenever you're standing there and you see that big stone, remember who God is. Now, verse 19, though, is where we get something that's worth really thinking about. And he smote the men of Beth Shemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 70 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. And the men of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall he go up from us? And they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath-jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord Come ye down and fetch it up to you. And the men of Kirjath-jearim came and fetched up the ark of the Lord, and brought it into the house of Abinadab in the hill, and sanctified Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. What's going on here? You see all these people in Israel die that have looked at the ark of the Lord. Well, the problem was the same problem with the Philistines. The Philistines had no right to the ark. The ark was supposed to be in the tabernacle, was supposed to be kept, and only accessed during the Yom Kippur. Israel was not in a special place where they had a unique right to treat God cavalierly. God says, I'm holy. And whether you're a Philistine or an Israelite, whether you're Eli and his sons, the chiefs of Gath, or the people of Beth Shemesh, no matter who you are, I'm holy, 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 and I expect to be treated as such. The men of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall he go up from us? They sent messengers to Kirjath-jearim, and they say, the Philistines are here, come and fetch it. And then Eleazar, a priest, is set aside, the new priest, set aside to be the one to keep the ark of the Lord. He's sanctified. He's set apart to do it correctly. Now, it would be a mistake to read this account and feel like you're watching an Indiana Jones movie and say, oh, the ark has got some tremendous power that just kills people. That's not what's happening here. The ark is protected by God. There's some debate where it says even he smote of the people 50,000 and 310 men, so 50,000, 70. It literally says 70, 50,000s. There's different ways that's translated because of some of the difficulty of the idea of 50,000 men living in one town in Israel at this time. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm prepared to talk about, but exactly how to interpret that. But I think that the point's plain. It's a great slaughter. That they looked at the ark. When David had the ark, it was covered. It was carried in the tent when it was taken into battle. And so their presumption to look at the ark reminds us that God's holy and expects to be treated as holy. And it's a reminder that although this is the end of the period of the judges, that the period of the judges is not over. That the people are still cavalier. That they still worship idols when they ought to be worshiping God. That they still take God too lightly. So the ark is back in their territory. It is going to be there for 20 years. And yet, when Samuel comes and preaches at the end of that period, the people are still worshiping strange gods and Asherah poles. They're still worshiping Baal and Asherah. They're still worshiping all these idols. So God has allowed his presence to be removed as one part of his process of gradually turning his people back to himself. That's the last tragedy that I want to point out here before we close. It took 7 months for the Philistines to realize that God was the one who was doing this and to send the ark back. It took the Israelites 20 years to realize that if God acted like this, that God expected their devotion and their worship. There's a lot more that we could say about this, but I am out of time. But if you have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. I'd love to look at those and do my best to answer them for you. All right, let's close with a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your grace, Lord. I thank you that although your holiness is unapproachable, that they couldn't look on the ark without dying, that we don't go unaided into your presence, that through Jesus, we are given access, that although if we had to stand on our own, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death, we would be like Philistia. We would be like these people in Israel. And yet we can come boldly before your throne of grace. We will one day see you just as you are and be transformed into your likeness. Lord, we worship you. That when we recognize our sin, when we recognize the punishment that our sin deserves, and we realize that that moment of humility, that moment of confession that seems like a defeat is truly the greatest victory, that then we can know you intimately. We can come into your presence. We just thank you for that good news, Lord. I pray, Father, that you'd help us to fix our eyes on that, to fix our eyes on you and all that you do, that we would be made more like your Son, Jesus. In whose name I pray. Amen. All right, thank you very much. We will talk to you very, very soon.